But once we produce it, we need to work out how we get this into the ether, into the mainstream ether, because I think, like we've just been talking about, I think especially in the Anglosphere, things are buttoned down quite firmly, and that, you know, the glass bottle that everyone's in is very difficult to break. And this is coming from a completely different angle, and I can already think of certainly philosophy, but I think also a lot of modern day sociology and modern day needs to get a different grip on what's happening, and especially, and we've talked about this before, haven't we? The rise of China now that's not going to go away. It's not going to be a blip, and Americans are going to have to get to work with the Chinese in the same way as the Chinese are going to have to. You know, we're all going to have to work with the Chinese, and the Chinese are all going to have to work with us. So the more of this kind of, the more we get an understanding, we can see where the fault lines are going to be, and we can see where the difficulties are going to be, as well as we can see where the opportunities are going to be.
Well, given the difficulty of breaking down glass bottles and the fact that everyone is incredibly busy, and I know when I write to people and send them something, you know, the chances are that they'll just say, oh, something more from Alan, they put it in their pending tray. You've got quite a lot of experience, and your interest has been in trying to break out of the confines of academia through your 316 site and through publishing and so on. How are we going to do this? I mean, conventionally, the only two ways I do it are through YouTube and films and streaming media service talks, which get, you know, a few hundred people. Then secondly, obviously publications, and obviously if they're specialized, then they go to, well, Cambridge Rivers Press publishes them, and, you know, a few hundred copies may be sold, and so on and so on. There might be a bigger circulation if they're co-published with Routledge International, which might happen. We could think about that. But they make them very expensive, and they tend to go to libraries. So the third thing, which is now happening, which means that although all this stuff may go into people's pending trays over here, or hardly known, or jostles with the thousands and thousands of bits of information that are coming out all the time, is that this isn't the case in China, that thanks to Zilan and her knowledge of the Chinese social media, I'm getting a much, much, much bigger audience in China than I am here, which was shown by that fact that I was on the Beijing Underground.
Fabulous.
And you know, when I write something for a Chinese magazine or newspaper, it'll go to 1 million, 2 million people. And also, if you select it, it'll go to the right people. So if it's in a certain magazine, it'll go to all the political elite. And I'm hoping now to work with perhaps with the new Chinese ambassador here, who's reading my stuff and so on. So China's all right. It's America that's more
America.
And America is not only so big that they don't basically have to read anything outside themselves, but also they don't like this sort of stuff, which is shown by what I mentioned to you, the reception of Letters to Lily, which was big in relativistic cultures like Scandinavia, or particularly in the Far East, Japan, China. They loved Letters to Lily. But when you got to America, you know, no way. This is, you know, on the one hand, on the other, British double speak shit, etc. I'm not, you know, he doesn't tell it to us straight, and he, you know, his values, where are they, and so on, so on, so on. So basically, I mean, I sold some copies, and my friends liked it, but so that is going to be the problem, because basically you're in a double bind, because the very thing that you're trying to release them from, which is a certain cultural myopia and so on, is the very thing that's going to stop any of them paying any attention to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think then as we continue with this, we need to with the project and get the stuff I'll try and find people that are good at social media and stuff like that, and try and find a way of, because a lot of it's about positioning it. A lot of it is about getting the hook, and getting that right. And I think, as you just said, I think certainly the American and largely British as well, because I've tried this out with a couple of friends of mine who work for the BBC and stuff, and they just say, "Oh, you just a China file, you know, you're one of these China files. You'll let them get away with anything. But they're coming for us." And I said, "No, they're not." But these are, you know, these are not stupid people, and they're not ignorant, but they don't know this stuff, and they don't want to hear it, and that's the difficulty. So I'm obviously
saying something. What?
Blinkered,
yes.
They're very blinkered, but it's partly, but I'm kind of aware that it's the way I set it up, and I'm obviously in a way, this is where using being a bit unclear or ducking and diving to get them to start listening might be the way that I have to, rather than say, look, this is what you need to understand about the Chinese. It's a bit like there was a case where they were talking about climate change, and the Americans are not good at listening to the word climate change, certain parts of America in particular. So Miami was very against anything that if you mentioned the phrase climate change, you'd get no support. So the climate change scientists in Miami, they were setting up these meetings and getting nowhere. So they went back and regrouped, and they thought, well, how do we, you know, it's important that, because Miami's going to get hit by climate change, they're all going to, you know, they're going underwater. So how do we get them to listen? So they put out a thing where they never mentioned climate change. They just talked about hinky weather. And if you talk about hinky weather in Miami and hinky weather in Texas, they'll listen. As long as you don't use...
What's hinky weather?
Hinky weather is weird weather, you know, weather that's not, you know, things aren't happening in the same way. Now, they're talking about climate change, and they were using all the same data and stuff as they'd used, but instead of linking it with climate change and giving them that heading, they gave it hinky weather, and they were happy to talk about hinky weather. Yes, there's a bit of hinky weather in Miami, hinky weather, no, snow in Texas, you know, what's going on? So maybe one of the things that we're going to have to do is to get, and I'm trying this out with these people because I want them to, I'm using them as kind of test cases. If I can get them to listen, because they're kind of like British intelligentsia people, very like you just said, blinkered in, and you know, one of them's an economist at Cambridge. I mean, she's very, very bright, and she knows lots and lots of things, and she's, you know, she's left leaning and all. So she's exactly the kind of person that you'd expect or hope would hear this stuff. So I'm soft soaping, I'm soft pedaling certain things and pushing other things, and trying to find connections between where they are and where we want them to get to, and then hope that they'll once they've got them hooked, they'll go further and see that it actually goes a lot further, and it's not as frightening as they think it is. But I think one of the things that they don't know is the history. They don't know their own history, and they don't know the history, and they certainly don't know Chinese history.
Yeah.
And actually that's always a big problem. People don't actually know where their own thoughts are coming from. You know, the thing about reading Gellner and I at least had a grip on modernity from that perspective, from that, you know, that Weberian stuff. So that does put you in touch with history, but a lot of people don't have that even. So although you're fighting that position, or you're arguing that that's very partial and doesn't work, they don't even know that that's a position. And that's the big difficulty we've got. And that's the thing that I think is really amazing about the work you've done, because actually, if you track from your writing through time, you know, your life from 41, and then through to where we've got to at the end here, we were talking about China and stuff. And then the things that you sent through the other day about the I can't remember what you called it now, the disadvantages of modernity or disease or whatever it was. It was a great title. That's
hidden injuries.
Hidden injuries. I think that's a new book. I mean, that's, you see, and I think that's another thing that we need to think about, because I think hidden injuries is a great title. People are going to be drawn to that just because of the title, because you know, it's a good kind of title. But if you look at what you're talking about there, and how to mourn, and the emptiness of it all, again, getting a grip on that and being able to articulate that is something that it's not happening at the moment, and it's not happening in philosophy either. This is the sad thing. At least, and Gellner made this point back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s and 40s. You know, with the war and everything. At least you had, you know, it wasn't great philosophy, but at least you had Sartre and Camus and these people talking about, you know, the existential problem of modernity, if you like. Whereas now it's not happening like that, and it's people are hooked on technologies, but they're not really understanding that. They're hooked on AI, but not in any philosophically interesting way. And when they talk about geopolitics, it's very much from it's very American. It's American dominated.